Greeting. My name is Michel Jean, and this is Just Come, a podcast which retraces the trajectory of successful immigrants within the United States. We are currently living in a world where there seems to be an unhealthy obsession with success. It seems whenever people are referring to success, they are only thinking of one thing, which is the accumulation of money. For example, we generally view as successful a startup founder who takes their company from zero to a multi-billion dollars valuation within the scope of a few years, or a banker who makes millions in commission working on Wall Street, or a professional athletes who make millions playing for their team. And the list goes on along those lines. There is no doubt that these are success stories, but they cannot be the only indices we consider when determining whether someone is successful or not. Even worse, they cannot be the only things that come to mind when the term success is being used. If that is the case, what does it mean for a teacher who spent his or her entire lifetime training hundreds of students who later become helpful members of society, or a single mother who raised three kids while juggling multiple minimum wage jobs and guiding them through college, or a young college graduate giving up a lush career on Wall Street so he or she can return to their community to organize and educate the population. Usually, those stories are not told, but if they are told, they become footnotes in someone else's success stories. In a society where the human experience is so blatantly ignored, it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to truly know each other. And if we don't know each other, how can we appreciate each individual not for the car they drive, or the clothes they wear, or the house they live in, but for the things that truly make them human? In this episode, I'm pleased to be joined by a friend, someone whom I've known for a very long time. Juan Lopez immigrated to the United States from Mexico as a dreamer. He went to Princeton University for undergrad and the University of Houston for law school. He currently works as in-house counsel for a tech company. His story is one which I think many immigrants who are currently living in the United States or who may be immigrating to the US in the future might be able to benefit from. One, thank you for agreeing to be our guest on Just Come Today. How is your day going so far?
Hey, Misha, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be part of your new project and really looking forward to speaking to our immigrant audience who we both love dearly. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. And you and I, we've known each other for quite some times. I believe our story begins when I was an intern at the Greater Boston Legal Services, working in the consumer rights unit, and there you were a fellow. Am I right in that?
Yeah, that's where we met. I remember you were a student intern. You were still in law school, and I had just recently graduated from law school, maybe 2 or 3 years prior. And we worked in the consumer unit, mostly helping people. Back then, it was we were coming out of the mortgage foreclosure crisis, so we were helping homeowners in the Boston area, mostly, low income, um, either navigate through the foreclosure crisis or help keep them in their homes for a bit longer while they settled into a more permanent housing situation. So it was great work, and I remember it fondly.
Yeah, no, thank you. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you as a guest, I remember, we used to take a walk, go for a break for coffee, and you used to share your story with me. And it's something, I was very fascinated by. So when someone looks at you right now, they might say, okay, this is a very successful person, but your story didn't really start there. You immigrated from Mexico at a very young age. Am I right in that?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, no, thank you for calling me successful. I think, that's a subjective term, but happy to talk about my story here for our immigrant audience. Yeah, so I was born in Mexico, and my parents brought me over when I was 4 years old, along with my brother who was 2 years old. And yeah, we immigrated to inner city Dallas. And just to give our listeners a brief overview of my story to help them kind of follow along. I think what we're going to be talking about here is, a little boy who grew up undocumented for the most part in poverty. I was lucky enough to have two parents in the house, but it's really a story of a little kid who had to learn how to survive through performance and found some success, but in the process didn't really learn how to be human and maybe lost himself along the way. And in the end, um, to answer your question of what is success, I'm gonna give the audience a little preview and say that my personal definition of success is, realizing that later in life, much later, I didn't realize this till much later in life, that living in this society as an undocumented poor kid, um, and playing into whiteness and performing for whiteness and maybe even trying to become assimilated, you lose your humanity in the process. And so my current definition of success is realizing that I don't need to prove my humanity and that I can define success by my own values, not whether I'm accepted by certain people or certain systems or certain institutions. So yeah, with that, let's get into it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you very much for saying that. And I believe you mentioned that, you when you first came in, you were in Dallas. So at what age did you come in, and what was the experience for you moving to Dallas from Mexico?
Yeah, so even before I get into that, let me just briefly touch on my family background. So because when a child is brought into this world, they inherit the family history that comes with it, right? So in my case, both of my parents were working class to lower middle class Mexicans. My mother was one of nine, and she lost her father when she was 3 years old. So her story was really one of economic hardship growing up with a single mother trying to raise nine kids in the, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then my father and she grew up more of in a mid-sized city in Mexico called San Luis Potosí, which is in the Central Plateau Mo between Monterrey, Mexico, and Mexico City. And then my father was from the rural area of the state of San Luis that they were both from. And he grew up without, his life is also one of struggle and hardship, survival. He grew up in a setting, he was one of 14 or 15. And I'm not really sure of the number because there were some infant deaths there. Infant mortality rates were high in rural Mexico in the 60s, early 60s. He grew up without running water, no electricity, in a rural kind of farming, ranching community. And he actually had to leave home at a very early age, 5 or 6, to be able to attend a local school that was a few kilometers down the road, but the roads were so bad that it took multiple hours to get there, right? So he had to be away from his own family early in his life. And I only say all that to really kind of paint the picture that me coming into the world, I came into the world from two human beings who had their own traumas. They'd suffered childhood traumas that they never fully processed or healed from, including traumas uh, with family death, family separation, um, poverty to a certain extent, and then also immigrating to this country is a whole nother trauma and cultural shock. Um, and so that's the little kid that I was. They brought me over when I was 4, along with my brother. We settled into inner city Dallas into an immigrant community that was mostly black and brown with some Asian immigrants from Laos and Vietnam. And I lived in that community until about I was 8 or 9. And then from there, we moved to a neighborhood in Dallas, which is a low income, high violence kind of neighborhood called Pleasant Grove, zip code 75217. And I was there from about the age of 8 or 9 to about 12. So and just as a side note here, later in life, most recently, I learned and I read an article that that zip code 75217 represents one of the top two zip codes in all of Texas that sends the most prisoners to the Texas State Prison, right? So you're talking about a community in a neighborhood that is really a quintessentially sometimes we hear talk about for example, a school to prison pipeline. Well, like this was a real thing. I lived in such a place in such a neighborhood. Um, and then
So,
fortunately for me, sorry, go ahead.
so if I may intervene here, you describe where your parents come from in Mexico. Which area in Mexico is that? Which part of Mexico?
Yeah, it's like in central Mexico. It looks a lot like Arizona. It's arid. It's in the central plateau of Mexico. It's about right between Monterrey, which is the main city in northern Mexico, and Mexico City.
So when your parents came here, were they the first generation immigrants to the United States?
Yeah, yeah, they were. My father didn't. We didn't know. We had no family members here, so in that sense, it really exacerbated our immigrant experience. My parents only had a few acquaintances or distant friends who they knew, but we were not. It was hard. We didn't have a community that we came into, right? And actually, my own immigrant story what was harsh in that way, in that growing up, we didn't grow up with family and community bonds that may be present in other immigrant communities.
So I know you were very young when your parents made the decision to coming to the United States, but do you have any recollection what was like the process or the this when the decision was made? What was the story they told you that they were going to leave from this area where they were and decided to move to this new land? Do you have any memory of that, of the conversation
I
which took
don't.
place?
No, I don't. I really don't. And for all the hardships that my parents went through earlier in life, they both went to professional school. They were both school teachers. In Mexico, it's called after high school, you go to a few years of, they call it La Normal. I believe other countries have a similar name, like normative school, where you learn a specific professional uh, skills, right? So they were both, my father was actually an elementary and middle school English teacher, and then my mother was an elementary school teacher, and they both worked as teachers in Mexico for a few years before they immigrated here. But back then there was very high inflation rates in Mexico. The economy was not great in the late 70s to mid 70s. And the economic and Texas was booming, Dallas was booming, Plano, Texas was booming. And so I think that was a lot of what drew them to immigrate.
So you also mentioned that this area in Dallas where you move in, you mentioned the zip codes, like they are among the two zip codes which basically feed or fed. I don't know if this is still happening, the most uh kids or young people to the prison. And also you came from an area in Mexico that wasn't very wealthy. But did you feel like that new place in Dallas, despite it being so bad, it was an improvement on your parents' life? Or did you have any story from your parents that said, okay, despite things being so bad over there, we still felt improved by moving to this new area?
Yeah, no, Misha, that's actually a great question. Thank you for asking. And honestly, that's something that people don't, something that I myself hasn't haven't appreciated. But I'll give you some color here. Growing up, for us, for my family, because we didn't have any other family in the country at the time. It was very lonely and it was very hard. My parents, worked very hard. Um, uh, and and what I'll say here is that later on in life, my I grew up undocumented from the age of 4 to about 15. But later in life, when I did attain legal, quote unquote, legal status or documented status, we were able to travel to Mexico to see our relatives down there. And my mother specifically has a very large, very cohesive family. Most of them live in the same city in Mexico. And I remember going down and just feeling the warmth and the security and the comfort of family. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, wow, like I feel so much happier here. I don't feel threatened. I feel safe. I feel loved. I feel welcomed. And I remember thinking, like, you know, was it worth it? Like, why, you know?
I
So
see.
absolutely, Miche. I definitely wouldn't say that early in my life, our life was better here than it maybe would have been in Mexico.
Okay, okay. So you think moving there was definitely an upgrade or an improvement, a progression in your family's situation.
No, moving here was harder.
What's out there?
We lived a harder, more difficult life than we would have in Mexico because in Mexico we were surrounded by family.
I see, I see. That's very interesting. At what age did you go to visit your parents again? What age were you when you went back there?
Oh, this was once I got legal status, probably in my early teens, like 13, 14.
So this is how you felt. Do you think your parents shared the same sentiment? Do you think having moved here and now facing the reality, seeing that maybe it wasn't so much of a good decision to relocate? Is that a conversation you've ever had with them?
I've never had that conversation, but I'll tell you that every time we left Mexico on those trips, we'd go back twice a year, maybe once a year during Christmas or the summertime. My mother and we would always, my father is different. His family's kind of very dysfunctional and spread out all over the place. Uh, he didn't have like a central point where his family's all over the place. So maybe he didn't have this, but what I'll say is that every time we would leave Mexico, we would leave in tears. We would leave sobbing. Like we didn't, it would be, we would be grieving that loss over and over every time we left.
I see. So you were in Dallas and you were very young. I guess can you share more a little bit like you also talk about the zip codes, uh the difficulty of being in such a very bad neighborhood. Like at what age did you start noticing that? And since you don't really have much memory about your time before you left Mexico, and I guess this area is all you knew. When did you start noticing that you were living in a very dangerous neighborhood and that your life was in danger, basically?
Oh, yeah, so I'll add some color there. I don't know if I ever really felt that my life was in danger, but for example, when we lived in inner city Dallas, we lived in low income housing. I remember living in these kind of rundown apartment complexes, but I remember being happy as a kid. I don't think you appreciate or know or are conscious of a lot of the trauma that's going on, right? Number one. Number two, I didn't, my parents didn't have any emotional guides kind of guiding them through their experience. Any negative experiences, emotions, we didn't have a language for trauma. We didn't know how to talk about it. But anyway, as a kid, from about the age of when I landed here in Dallas to from 4 years old to about, oh, I don't know, into my teens, 12 or 13, we were in this immigrant community, and I remember it being a joyful time. I remember playing with kids. For example, our apartment complex had this courtyard that flooded during heavy rainstorms, and one of my earliest, happiest memories was just playing in that puddle of eh, uh, uh, in that puddle after the rainstorm. And then later on, when we moved to Pleasant Grove, similarly, I was younger. I remember having a lot of kids, spending a lot of time playing in the streets, playing football, riding our bikes around the neighborhood. Um, but there was a lot of, gang activity there. And I think my parents recognized that as we were getting older. And so when I was about 13 is when we moved to a suburb north of Dallas. Um, called Richardson, Texas, and that's where I went. That's where I went for most of middle school through high school before going off to Princeton and then law school.
I see. So I want to go back to the Dallas area. What's the name of this community again? The one where the gangs were basically running the town.
Yeah, it's called Pleasant Grove.
Pleasant Grove. So one, I mean, since we're talking about like, it's an area which sends a lot of kids or a lot of youngsters to prison. Uh, didn't you feel a sense of danger, like being basically could be the victim of being, one of those kids who is arrested by the police and sent to prison? Was that something which ever crossed your mind?
Well, I'll give you some examples of some of the
Yeah.
experiences I had because, for example, there was the local middle school that I would have gone to had I stayed there. I remember it wasn't super common, but you would hear stories of a gun being brought to school or of there being a shooting at the school, and for me, that was very scary. Um, there was a house behind our house and over a few houses on our street that was a known kind of gang den. And at least once a month, if not every other month, that we'd hear shootings and there were drive-bys, and then that would be followed by police helicopters and sirens. And, I remember seeing police chases on my street, even through my backyard. So it was stuff like that, Miche. Um, but me personally, I kind of kept to myself. And, one of the themes of my life is that early on, I learned how to survive through performance. And for me personally, that meant performing well in school. My parents were school teachers. And one thing they did give me was an appreciation and a value for education. And I took that very seriously. And I gave it my all in school. And so what I did personally is, when there was chaos in my neighborhood or at home, or when I felt the fear of being undocumented or the fear of being poor or fear of helplessness or even just emotional numbness, what I would do is I compartmentalized those emotions and those feelings, and I focused on school, and I focused on my classes, I focused on my homework, I focused on the next test, the next paper. And so that's how I survived and how I performed.
I see. So, like the fear of being undocumented, did you have a sense that you could be deported when you were a kid? Is that something your parents discussed? And what was the plan if that did happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing, I mean, personally for me, my family life was a bit chaotic. It was emotionally chaotic. It was we didn't, unfortunately, I think because of mostly because of a lot of the trauma my parents brought with them and that I inherited, we had a somewhat of a dysfunctional family life, right? So there wasn't a lot of communication, so we didn't talk about it too much. But the fear of being separated, the fear of disappearing overnight, of being, sent back to somewhere where you don't know, but the government says you belong, was real. That was real. But fortunately, also during the late 80s to mid 90s, the environment maybe was not as severe as it is today. You didn't hear about immigrations raiding people's homes or cities, right? Um, you mostly found those government agents along the border. I remember being super scared every time we crossed the border. Like that was one of, the scariest things for me as a child.
I
So
see.
that fear w was very real. Um, but it wasn't, the situation was not as severe, for example, as it is today in inland United States.
I see.
You know,
So,
we're,
so one, you mentioned the traumas you've inherited from your family. So far, the only thing you've mentioned about your family living in Mexico is the fact that it was a very poor area and your parents were fairly educated. They were teachers. Are there other stories that that caused those traumas you haven't mentioned, or is that really the fact that of living in such terrible poverty that caused those emotional trauma?
yeah, no, for me, I think it was just, the trauma of growing up undocumented, growing up in fear. Um, grow It's not like we were starving to death, Misha, because my parents work hard, so we always had food on the table, even if it was just rice and beans and tortillas, right? There was always something to eat. It may not have been the most luxurious or most nutritional food, but and sometimes we didn't get second servings. But, it was in a situation, and our clothes were, of course, hand-me-downs, and we wore one pair of shoes per year, for example, right? But we weren't like on the streets. We weren't unhoused,
I see.
which was huge, right? That's a huge benefit because millions of people are growing up in those situations, and that's not something I personally experienced.
I see.
But I think it was those traumas, Misha, and as a young kid, not having an adult to guide me through these emotions and psychological experiences was in and of itself traumatizing.
I see. So basically, your parents, they were juggling having to work hard to put food on the table, and that's what caused them not to be there for you. Am I clear with that?
Yeah, that and they didn't know how to handle their own traumas and their own emotions, right?
Okay,
They didn't have a language for it, let alone honestly, there was a complete lack of even acknowledgement of some of those very hard
I
emotions,
see. So despite the fact that your parents were teachers, do you think it's a cultural issue, not knowing how to communicate those feelings with kids, or you think it is because that you know the parents they just like I mean your parents are teachers, basically they are very educated and they work with students. What do you think would have caused them not being able to communicate with you because you spoke Spanish and they spoke Spanish?
Yeah, so unfortunately for me, Miche,
Mhm.
I don't know if this applies to our entire immigrant community here, but just personally for me and my own story,
Yeah,
my parents just had a toxic relationship, and that was very hard. It was not, it was everything but physical.
I see.
So
I see.
if you can imagine a very toxic relationship up to the point of getting physical, that's kind of what I lived through,
I see.
right? Yeah.
So we're gonna move it off from this a little bit. You also mentioned moving to Richardson, which is a new community. What was the like? How did you feel? I guess let me ask this question differently. Did you feel an improvement having moved from Falls Grove uh, to
Pleasant
Richardson?
Grove to Richardson.
Yeah,
Yeah, honestly, yeah, when I lived in Pleasant Grove, I was comfortable. It was very diverse, even though it was somewhat violent. It was my home. I knew it. And moving to Richardson was a complete culture shock. It was the first time where the student body of the school that I attended was 50% or more white. Up until that point, for example, when I went to an elementary school, low income immigrant community, where in a school of 300 or 400 kids, there were maybe like two white kids, right? And everybody else was mostly black and brown. So that's kind of the environment I grew up in. And so moving to Richardson, Texas, which is a primarily white community, though it is middle class to lower middle class with some segments being upper middle class. It's not that I necessarily felt unwelcome. It's that it was a culture shock for me. I didn't know how to relate to kids, and a lot of them didn't know how to relate to me. And again, my approach was I compartmentalized a lot of that and just focused on school.
I see. So can you break this down a little bit more? Like what did you compartmentalize? Did it have to do with bullying? Did it have to do with how teachers treated you as basically looking different in the school? Like which experiences did you compartmentalize specifically?
Yeah, so at that point I was still undocumented, so definitely compartmentalized the fear of being undocumented, the fear of being deported, um, the fear of, and for a very self-conscious kid who's beginning to go through puberty, there's stressors that only a kid of that age would appreciate that adults may not grasp, right? So there's that sort of stuff and feelings of loneliness, not having many friends, if any friends. And it wasn't so much the teachers because I think for the most part I had a good experience with teachers because I was a dedicated, very focused student and they appreciated that. Um, but yeah, a little bit of bullying, nothing too severe. I mean, bullying was super common and prevalent in the 90s, especially in Texas, the suburbs of Dallas. It was like a given, right? But yeah, a little bit of bullying, mostly maybe verbal or side remarks, stuff like that.
I see. So despite those very difficult experiences, you were able to perform well in high school where you ended up going to Princeton, which, generally recruits the best at this age. So I guess can you share more how you were able to having to deal with those, traumas, these difficult experiences, the fear of being undocumented, and yet be able to do so well in high school and earning a seat at a prestigious academic institution, so that Princeton.
Yeah, it was hard, Misha. And the other thing you got to realize too is that as I'm growing, as I'm entering white spaces, as I'm moving into a white suburban community, the I'm starting to experience and get an introduction to whiteness, right? And I begin to subconsciously associate whiteness with success, with wealth, with legitimacy, with beauty. And for example, my parents both worked for wealthy white people. My father was a paint house painter, so he was oftentimes in big mansions doing the work there as a, not on his own, but as a group of workers. My mother worked for wealthy white people. In fact, it's interesting, but one of the families that she worked for many, many years was the Wilson family, who were the parents to Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson, who ended up, becoming major movie stars in the early 2000s to late 90s. And the media reinforced it. Back then we didn't have social media. All we had was live TV and magazines. We had cable TV. I didn't grow up with cable TV, but every magazine in the grocery store published by a New York publishing house featured, white models, blonde, blue-eyed. So that's, whiteness was everywhere. And it reinforced the idea that to be white was to be beautiful, to be legitimate, to be powerful, right? Um, and I only say that to kind of paint a picture of some of the psychology and emotion that that I'm going through with no guidance, right? I'm just absorbing it and I'm surviving and I'm performing and I'm finding success through that. What little success I had was just hunkering down and focusing on school. And then later in high school, I got into track and running and cross country. And I found that to be a really good outlet for the rage that was within me, for these unaddressed emotions, for the internal chaos that was within me. And
So, so, so sorry to interrupt you, but did you feel, talking about white as beauty, white as success, and white as uh a symbol of legitimacy? Did you have a feeling that you were not handsome or beautiful because you didn't look white? And did you also feel you could not succeed since you didn't look white? Because for me, you look white. So I guess how did this feeling that you didn't look white, how did that come up to you?
yeah, no, I definitely did not feel white. I didn't feel like I looked white, right? Like I look Mexican. I look somewhat indigenous. Yes, I'm lighter skinned, absolutely. Like I, I'm not looking to excuse in any way the benefits I've gained from being more light skinned. Like that's absolutely a fact of life, right? Um, um, but I I guess that I felt it. I felt, you know, you know, I felt different and and I felt that kind of frustration and anger and rage. And again, personally, what I did is I compartmentalized and just focused on school and running
I
for the
see.
most part.
So those wealthy families your parents work for, like what was your experience with them? Did you go to see them and do you feel like they treated you as their kids? Like, how did they treat you basically?
Yeah, no, they treated me, for the most part, respectfully. They didn't embrace me as their children or or even grandchildren in any way. Um, I think what I as now that I'm older, I can see that it was a transactional relationship. My parents worked, my mother worked for them. She did a job, and I think that's how I think that's very common in this country. Having business relationships and transactional relationships is very common. But I think that exposure to that degree of wealth and whiteness did sh- did shape, my viewpoint on things, because not every kid gets these experiences. Not every kid gets to see how white wealthy families live or what they do or what their homes look like, right? And I got a glimpse of that. And and I think that shaped me probably in ways that I don't even I'm still trying to understand to this day.
Yeah. So, you were undocumented and your parents were working for very wealthy white family and you ended up going to Princeton, which basically is a school that is generally associated with the elite, the wealthy elite. Uh, so how did you, reconcile those those different uh things, right? Like you've been undocumented and feeling a sense of excluded from society, yet reaching the pinnacle of academic elite in the United States.
Yeah.
These are really very contradictory things, basically.
Yeah, and I think the hard part for me there was that as a young adult, as a young man, when I'm in my teens throughout my high school years, I really believed that if I worked hard enough and succeeded at their game, that I would be accepted, right? In other words, you can look at it this way. At the time, I was just ultra focused on doing what was within my control. And what was within my control was trying my best in school and athletics, right? And I sincerely believe that I remember when I went to Princeton, I was like, I've made it. Like, they're gonna respect me now. But then it was a huge shock when I realized, when I got to Princeton, and I realized that I wasn't accepted. And I think that was very um, emotionally and psychologically damaging to me. Um, but it helped me understand what I know now, and it's that, acceptance by those systems, if you can even get it, which honestly I don't even know if it's possible for a black or brown person, but even if you can, it's not the same thing as self-respect.
So what does acceptance mean? Is it, you know, accepting you for being not white, or is it accepting you for being equally intelligent as somebody as a kid or who is at Princeton? Like what do you think is basically what were they rejecting you for?
Yeah, so I don't think based on my personal experiences, I don't think it's possible for mainstream power holding white America to accept blackness or to accept brownness. It's not possible, right? What I thought as a kid is that what I thought in simple term is that I could maybe assimilate and they would accept me, right? Because I'm succeeding at their game, because I'm basically, uh, that I haven't heard this term in a while, but it reminds me of the model minority. Like when I was in college, that was a huge deal. Asians were referred as the model minority because of their ability to succeed in, within the white power structures of
I,
America,
I've still
right?
heard it from now and then. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I haven't heard that in a while, which is interesting. The term has gone out of flavor. I personally haven't, but it sounds like you have. So that's what I believed. But yeah, no, they're judging you by their own standards, Miche. It's not about they don't have the ability or the imagination to open up their minds or their hearts to see
Can you
non-whites
so
as human beings.
can I probe this a little bit further? You know, just to get some concrete examples, were you able to join study groups? Were you able to join clubs? And did students invite you to their, you know, social events like their birthday party? I guess I'm trying to understand what is it that they didn't accept you for?
Yeah, and you're talking about my Princeton experience, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, Misha, my Princeton experience was filled with rage. I suffered through depression through all 4 years. I didn't feel accepted. I didn't feel like I belonged. All of my social relationships were pretty much with people who look like me, black and brown people. Uh, people who look like me. I mean, I made a lot of friends who were of my similar immigrant, like Mexican experience. I also made black friends. But in terms of being accepted by the majority white student population, no, I did not. I honestly did not have any, maybe, I mean, no more than a handful, no more than like three or four white friends, frankly.
So one, let me ask you a little bit more. Did you join any student groups at Princeton? Were you part of any student association that were not like just exclusively black and brown people groups?
No, I didn't. No. All the student groups that I associated with were um like black and brown student groups.
So do you think so if you were to request to join this group, do you think they would reject your application?
Not so much reject Misha, but I personally, because of my background, what I was taught growing up is to value human relationships and to value other people as human beings, to value truth and honor and honesty. And I'm not somebody personally, no judgment, but I'm not somebody who personally plays into like transactional relationships. or relationships where you're strategizing for yourself, right? Much like we do now in corporate America. So I only say that in that, I was very sensitive to those things. So just feeling an ounce uh, of not belonging was enough for me not to be inclined to apply to a group or to want to be part of a group, right?
I see. So I guess, you know, I have a couple questions on that. And I'm going to let me start with this one. You know, there is a perception that going to a school, an Ivy League, like Princeton, I'm going to leave the term Ivy League aside because I feel like it clouds other stuff. But going to an academic institution like Princeton, which is viewed as the pinnacle of academic achievement. So when you go to Princeton, that means, you are super intelligent, you are super studious, you are among the best of the best. And people usually, you think of someone who is educated as open-minded, somebody, who is willing to shed certain prejudices and to, experience the world. So you are saying that, you were not accepted, because you didn't look white, basically, you're not white. I'm trying to understand how come you have a school, like Princeton, which basically bring in the best, the creme de la creme in terms of uh, America's intellectuals, and yet, you are also saying that those people are close-minded. So you understand for someone who didn't go to Princeton, this is a little bit shocking to me. So maybe, you could enlighten me here.
Yeah, no, think about it this way, Miche. When you walk into a corporate boardroom or even just a corporate space, you know, most people, what are they there for? They're there for themselves, right? They're there for their salary, they're there for their position, they're there to strategize for their own benefit, they're there to develop transactional relationships with colleagues, with clients. So yeah, I mean, in a way, yes, you could call it closed-minded, but just like grown adults that you see within corporate America, these kids at Princeton had success in high school. It doesn't mean that they're geniuses. Like, I'm certainly not a genius. I was able to focus and work really hard and get myself there. Um, and maybe 10% of the student body was a genius, and most of that 10% of the geniuses who were there, I rarely saw. They were off, you know, in the science labs and math buildings, doing studies and research. But let me back up. So most of the student population there, they're there, and this is actually very true of upper middle class society. Upper middle class society values relationships because of what they can get out of those relationships. And in a similar way, that most of the student body is there. They're at Princeton, not necessarily, I mean, some of them are there to nurture genuine friendships and genuine relationships with others. But for the most part, most of those students are there for themselves to get what they can get out of the school, whether it's connections, networking, whether it's a degree, whether it's a pre-med, certificate so that they can then go to med school or their history degree so they can go to law school. That's what they're there for. They're not there to open their hearts and their minds to people who come from a different experience than they do, or to people who look different than they do, right? Um, most of those people saw me, a broke kid from Dallas who they didn't think belonged there. And honestly, I think a lot of them were just offended by me.
But
They
one,
were like, "Who's this kid?
how,
He can't do
how,
anything for me."
how do they know you are broke? I mean, they just see you. You could just be super wealthy and looking, being humble and not wearing expensive clothes. How do they know who you are?
Oh, they could. Oh, Miche, the subtleties of class in America are very small. They could tell by my shoes, by my hair, by my clothing, by my backpack, by the manner in which I speak, by the things I speak about, talk about, all those little things.
So can you give me an example? Let's say, for example, your father was a billionaire and you belong to this billionaire class. What do you think is an example of thing you would talk about versus a poor kid, what they would talk about on campus?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, those kids, they're talking about the networks they have, the people they know, the families they know, the private jets they've been on, the vacations they've taken, the private island they visited over the summer, um, the New York City penthouses they visited, or the people they know who own these penthouses, stuff like that, which for me, I don't even know this stuff exists,
I
right?
see.
So.
So I did say I have a few questions on that. Another question is that when someone goes to an elite school, we also hear that, it's for the networking. So what is the networking there if people are not accepting you? Like, and if people are rejecting you for being already been poor, how do you move up from here?
Yeah, and there are, for example, I know of people who grew up, poor or lower middle class or middle class even in New York or other big cities who were able to, make it to Wall Street, for example, that came out of Princeton. So for them, networking means, first of all, like doing really well at Princeton in 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 math classes, economics classes, right? And then building up a resume that then gets your foot into the door at a Wall Street firm or a high paying job, for example. And then once you're there, networking means buying into the culture, um, getting to know the power players, using that to your advantage, right? For a kid like me who didn't know, know about any of that. And frankly, I was not interested in any of that. Just again, because going back, like what I value is human relationships. I value honesty and truth. Those sort of transactional relationships were not something I was interested in.
So, so so when you say, so you mentioned that those people would just reject you for uh, not looking white and you are brown. But how can somebody buy into the culture? Let's say, for example, I'm a black kid going to Princeton, and you look white. And, I mean, not just white, you look white to me, and I am very, very black. How can I buy into the culture? What do I do? Do I give somebody like what does the transaction involve to buy into the culture?
Yeah, for somebody like you, Misha,
Yeah, yeah.
so you would have to kiss a lot of ass and talk about like your rich Haitian connections. Honestly, yeah. Does that,
Okay. But so basically, I have to have the wish connection, right? If I don't have the
right?
wish connections, am I lying? At some point, they will discover that I can't deliver on that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's people who are able to kind of, I'm not smart enough to lie and remember all the lies. That's just not, I don't have that talent. But yeah, there's examples out there of people who do that, right? If you don't, but yet you're really interested in climbing the social ladder and striking it big and striking it rich. Um, yeah, what you do is you try to do really well there. You use the Princeton name. And but what I mean by do really well, like do really well in school, 4.0 GPA, get your foot in the door at a high paying firm. And then once you're there, you do the same thing. You like work really hard, um, make as many connections as you can, foster relationships and mentorship relationships, and have somebody kind of take you under their wing and pull you up.
So you are saying that it is possible not to be white and to make good connections at Princeton. Is that what you're saying? Like if you are willing to do certain things.
I think so. I mean, it's not impossible, right, Michelle? But it's also like you're talking about like 1%, one out of 100, right? So when you say whether it's possible, I mean, is one out of 100 possible? Is that within the realm of possibilities? Yes, but is it realistic? I don't think so.
I see. I see.
But what I've learned, Miche, too, is that through that process, you lose your humanity, which because I went through a process myself, which wasn't as extreme, but throughout high school, I worked very hard. I focused. I thought that I would be met with open arms when I went to Princeton, and I wasn't, and that was very discouraging and frustrating for me. Um, I've come out of it all the wiser, and and I've come out of it spiritually rich, and I'm glad I went through that experience, right? But some people never come to the conclusions that I've come to. And that's okay. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just sharing my thoughts and experiences
No,
with you.
definitely. So what is the conclusion you think they haven't come to?
The conclusion is that you get, by playing into the game, by playing into another's culture, uh, by defining success based on the values of others, based on the system of whiteness, you, as a black man, as a brown man, you can lose your humanity throughout that process, in my opinion. And one of the things I'm most proud of now is that I'm just now be learning how to become whole. Because for a long time, especially growing up, I I taught myself how to survive and how to perform and how to succeed through that process. But I honestly feel that just now that I've come into now that I've entered my 40s and I'm a father, that I'm just beginning to learn how to feel and how to heal and how to live by my own standards.
I see. Is that what you mentioned that like losing your humanity? So basically you are trying to live up to somebody else's standard?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to give you an example, Misha, throughout my college career and even into through law school, I struggled with feelings of rage, shame. Depression was real. It was very hard at times. I had to push myself very hard to even get myself through college at times because my depression was so severe. But I did the same thing. I, I, I compartmentalize my depression and my rage and push through things.
So one you know I had a similar experience and when I came to the United States. But let me ask you, right? So if somebody is looking at you and hearing your stories, uh, coming to the United States from a very poor area in Mexico, which not really have much memories of, and first, living in another poor area in Dallas, and now you make it to the very height of American elite. And somebody would say, man, this guy is a dream story, right? He's a token minority and he should be happy, should be grateful. And you are saying that while you were there, you were not, you were not happy, you lost your humanity, and now you are regaining it. So how can you shed light for someone who is trying to say, okay, that was, the success. That was the you reaching your point where people should feel like you are living your best life. Coming from Mexico, where you had no hope you would have ever attend, Princeton University. Now you are hanging out with the best, the richest, the American elite. And how do you reconcile what how people think you should feel and how you actually feel?
Yeah, so currently I am happy. I wouldn't say that I'm part of the elite by any means. I think my trajectory has been funny. Like I now live in upper middle class community in Massachusetts, south of Boston. That's like 98% white. And it's funny to think about that because really, this is kind of the environment that I lived through college, and I feel comfortable in it now, and I'm able to be myself for the most part. Sometimes it's still difficult, but it's interesting. I live in this community that's 98% white, but I'm able to be myself, and I'm actually the happiest I've ever been in my life. Um, I think that only what that says is that I've learned from my experience. But to get to some of your questions, I think that the guilt I felt in college was real that you just talked about. College, emotionally and psychologically, it was very hard. And in addition to feelings of rage and depression and maybe destructive behaviors that I was engaging in back then, there was also this deep guilt that you just described that, you know, feeling that Princeton was a gift that you should be honored and feel and feel happy and feel fulfilled and be grateful that you're there. And honestly, that deep sense of guilt is something that pushed me through and allowed me to get through college, allowed me to graduate from Princeton. That guilt that, yeah, like I'm one of the select few, and very few people get this opportunity, and I should make the most of it. So that was definitely present.
I see. And so you referring that right now you are living your best life, you are happy, you're living in a like completely white community, and and having learned those experiences allow you uh to be happy right now, despite living in a very white community. Can you like share more like about the experiences you learn that are serving you right now, allowing you to live happily in this community?
Yeah, I think they shaped the person I am today. I'm deep down at the base level, I'm a survivor, and I learned, and I'm not super social, and I kind of keep to myself, right? And maybe living in a community such as the one I live in now, um, I'm not saying that this is the net. I'm not saying that I was born this way. I was definitely shaped to be who I am today, but I think those experiences, Miche, the from the early age of like feeling deep feelings of loneliness and unaddressed, unspoken emotional turmoil, um, compartmentalizing very hard feelings and emotions and focusing on the task at hand. I think throughout the years shaped me into a person who's comfortable being a loner almost, being different. Um, does that help answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. So it seems you are saying that you are happy by being by basically living lonelier than trying to be accepted into a community. Is that am I getting this clearly?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Do you think this is true happiness, or do you feel like you also earlier mentioned the fact that when you went to Mexico, and you also talk about how you and your parents every time you live in Mexico, you are always in tears, uh and how happy you were going back the first time. Uh, you were in a community where you felt accepted, you felt love, and now you are lonely but you feel happy. Do you think this is truly genuine happiness, or because you also use the term surviving, so you can't be happy, I guess, if you are surviving? I'm not really sure those two things are the same.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. That's fair. That's a good question. I think I'm fulfilled in my professional life, and I think I'm fulfilled in my family life. I have two young kids who keep me very busy. Um, I keep in touch with black and brown friends, even though I don't see them on a daily basis. But in terms, I mean, I think honestly, Michelle, that's a great question. And somebody could be listening to this. And I hope, I'm not here to be any sort of model for anybody. I'm just here to openly and honestly share my own experience
Yeah.
and for people to get whatever they can get out of this. right? And I think that's a fair question because, Miche, honestly, maybe I don't have, I feel happy in my everyday life, but maybe you're right. Maybe I haven't experienced true happiness because I haven't experienced being embraced by a welcoming community, right?
I see.
And so, right? So if
Yeah,
you don't know what you're missing, how do you actually know, right?
yeah, yeah.
So,
So,
so for example,
mhm,
yeah, so for example, here's like a dumb little analogy. Like if all you've ever had in your life are Burger King hamburgers and you love your Whopper, you love those hamburgers and you think they're really good hamburgers, but you've never had a freshly ground burger with fresh cheese, fresh lettuce and tomatoes from like a gourmet shop, for example. How do you know how do you know that's actually your favorite burger when you haven't had this other one, right?
yeah, yeah. So, as we are wrapping this up, one, let me ask you a few more questions. So, we look into your trajectory, uh, where you are right now. So, what do you think is the next stage, in your life? So, you mentioned you are happy, but you're also surviving. Are you working on something else where you feel like that's the next fulfillment for you?
So currently, over the past few years, I've been reading a lot of social historical analysis on whiteness, for example, in the form of even novels and historical books. Like for example, if you year or two ago, I finally read some Toni Morrison. Unfortunately, I had never read Toni Morrison before. Um, Unfortunately, it's not something that was introduced to me in high school or even college. But I read The Bluest Eyes, and if you haven't read that novel, it's incredible. It's about whiteness. It's about a little girl who's born in the South, a black little girl, um, who dreams of having blue eyes so that she can escape the hardships of being black in America.
That was part of our reading in my reading in English literature in college.
Yeah, and so it was written in the 70s or late 60s, I believe, and it's an incredible, work of art. And I'm currently reading. I actually have it right here, The Dawning of the Apocalypse by Gerald Horne. I had not heard of Gerald Horne before, but he's an incredible scholar, has written dozens of books. And this book is on the roots of slavery, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and capitalism in the 16th century, so in the 1500s.
I
And he
see.
really, through a historical and social analysis, traces the roots of these four things: slavery, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and capitalism, which all took root in the 1500s. And it's been kind of eye-opening. So, so kind of, and this is all in between being a parent and, you know, being a lawyer and finding success in the workplace as well, and just finding the time to pick up on things. And so that's kind of what been really enjoying that, Miche. It's a little theoretical, but it helps me see things more clearly and it helps me find my own place in the world. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and it's very interesting, right? Because look at you. You are a lawyer. You went to an Ivy League, and not any. You went to an Ivy League, Princeton University, and you look really white skinned, and you are struggling with
Come on, man, you got to stop calling me white.
look what I mean. So one,
No, I get it. I get it.
no,
I get
let me
it.
give you an example, right? So. Uh, if you were to go to a country like Haiti or Jamaica or uh, anywhere in Africa, I know that because I grew up in Haiti, a
Yeah.
kid looking at you would not be able to differentiate, make those kind of like small details like they would just like say, hey, this guy is white, but they wouldn't, they would just look at you and they would call you white. And, it's very interesting, that people can go very, very far into the details to identify. if you are white enough. But I guess the point I was trying to make here is that you check all the boxes for success in America, and we still, you still are struggling with being accepted. And the reason I find this very interesting, if you were to, look at someone who didn't go to a prestigious university and who doesn't look light skinned, and in a society like we are right now, I guess like what is the hope for them? Uh, if you are
Yeah.
with everything you have accomplished, you are still struggling. I guess maybe you could talk more about that. Does that really give you reflection about someone who is darker than you, somebody who is, didn't have the privilege of going to a school like Princeton?
Yeah, no, Misha, absolutely. That's something that I've realized in the last few years, maybe in the last 5 years. I had that awkward realization that my my own whiteness, my own light skin definitely gave me advantages over others. You're right. I'm also almost 6 feet tall, right? So that had to play a role, right? Um, I mean, there's a study out there, Misha, I think that was done in the 90s, and I don't have the title, but it's a paper, you can Google it. There was a study of elementary school kids in South Texas. So, 95% Mexican down there, right? What the study did is they graded the kids based on their skin tones, so from lighter to darker. And what they found was that academic success was correlated with lighter skin. So what was happening is that either subconsciously or consciously, teachers in the school system was selecting the lighter kids to be the ones who would be more academically successful, or lighter skin correlated with more academic success, right? And that doesn't mean that the lighter you are, the smarter you are. That's absolutely not true. Like, race is a social construct. So what's going on is that the system is rewarding whiteness, and that's manifesting itself through like higher academic achievements, right? So teachers treat you better if you're lighter skinned, for example, and because you treat you better, you feel more comfortable with the teacher, you feel more invested in the schoolwork, you begin doing better, right? But if you're darker, if you don't feel like you belong, you have less of a motivation, for example, to try hard in school, right? So yeah, absolutely. Um, my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, tells me a story when he was like in first or second grade. He had a teacher who was pretty racist, and he sat like the brown kids in the back, and he was one of the kids who like sat in the back. And he literally told me that like he sensed her racism, and because of that, he sat in the back with his friends and just like talked throughout class and didn't care, right? So like that's a perfect example of what was going on in that study. Like, he's told me about his experience. He said,
Yeah,
"Yeah, they made me to feel different. So you know what? I gave up. I'm gonna sit in the back and eat my lunch and like talk through class, and that's it."
yeah, and this is something I definitely want to talk about. White racist teacher, like people talk about racist cops, racist judge, racist, uh, administrator, but rarely do we have a conversation about a racist teacher. I guess the reason I think this is important, if you are a black kid or an immigrant or a brown kid and you have a racist teacher who doesn't see you as belonging, they can actually act, they can do things which cause you not to progress in the system. Do you have some thought on that one?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that example that I give definitely proves it. And like I said, there's studies been that have been done on this.
yeah,
You see it in the media, like depending on the tone of your skin, you're either like a misguided teenager or you're a thug, right? So that you can see dozens of examples out there where a white kid does the same thing, maybe breaks into a house and steals something, and no, suddenly, the media labels that kid as a misguided kid who's got, emotional problems.
yeah.
Whereas if a black kid does it, he's automatically a thug and a criminal and should be penalized. right?
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that may have to do, and I'm going to speculate there, the fact that if you are light skinned, people uh quickly assume that you probably have one person who is parent, who is white, uh in your parents, and therefore they see you as more related to them. Whereas if you are black, they know, okay, you probably have both parents who are black and there is not much uh, in common. Or do you feel like those people are acting unconsciously? They're not really aware that they are being racist.
I think that racism is the fabric of American life. It's part of American life, it's part of American history, it's part of American culture. Whether it's subconscious or unconscious, whether it's conscious or subconscious or unconscious, it doesn't really matter. Like it's a fact of life. It's real. Like there's no excuse for it, and we need to own it and we need to acknowledge it
Yeah,
because that's step number one. And we can't move beyond and we can't progress unless we talk about it, we acknowledge it as something real, we don't excuse it, and until we do that, we're never going to move beyond the dark history that this country has.
yeah. One, so we are going to end, but I asked you this question earlier. I'm going to re-ask it again. I'm going to ask you again. Uh, and hopefully I'm going to ask it better this time. Seeing you having accomplished so much and in your education and seeing how hard it is for you, what do you think is the hope for people in America? Right? We talk about the fact that America is a country where racism, I mean, I know that it's part of its DNA. And we still the country is still being a lot of the things that are done on a racist basis. But there is a sense of perception that when someone has accomplished so much, that the path is a little bit easier on you. So, like, taking a step back from yourself and looking at the rest of the people in the street, uneducated, didn't go to college, they are in prison or they got released from prison, and who is like who is thinking for them? Who is helping them? Especially if those people are not white.
Yeah, currently, yeah, nope, we shouldn't. Okay, two things here. So, three things. Number one, like I totally agree with you in terms of the whiteness that I hold, right? Whether it's physical whiteness, I hold cultural whiteness because of the education I've gotten and the opportunities I've received. I, I hold I hold whiteness to a certain degree, right? And because of that, I don't hold myself as a model for what people should strive for because I understand that not everybody looks like me and not everybody's going to have the opportunities that I have, right? I'm just here to share my experience honestly and openly. And then in terms of our people and our community, like we can't wait around for people to save us. Like there's no saving. We need to help ourselves and we need to save each other and we need to organize for ourselves. Like nobody's gonna come in and wave a magic wand and give us what we need. And certainly, you know, the past few years have proven that this government does not have our, poor people's interest in mind at all. Current government is here to serve the rich and the ultra rich specifically. Um, and so the hope has to be in ourselves. The hope has to be in self-organizing and in our imagination of of standing up a third political party, for example. I really personally do not have any hope in the current political establishment. If you want to begin to approach the solution to some of these problems that you mentioned through a political lens, in my opinion, the political establishment is totally corrupt. There's no hope there. And so what does that leave? That only leaves us. And yeah, I'll leave you with something else. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly because they never taught me this in school. But the wretched of the earth, France Fanon, you know, he was anti-colonial revolutionary And currently, Mishi, on a global scale, currently we are in the decolonization era. And that decolonization era began with the, historic victory in Haiti and the rich history that your people and your country brings to the world, right? And I say that because who freed Haiti? Nobody freed Haiti. Haiti freed itself, right? Just like the enslaved people of America, nobody freed. Abraham Lincoln didn't free anybody. The people freed themselves and they fought for themselves over hundreds of years. And it's in the same light. Freedoms and liberties are not something that are given to us. It's something that we have to fight every day for, and we can't take that for granted.
Thank you so much, my friend. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Misha.